guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Today I'm really, well, maybe I should introduce myself a little bit as Joseph Chen, Dean of the College of Liberal Arts here at National Taiwan University. Today I'm really happy and honored to serve as a moderate for this session, the second part. And the title of this session is Thoughts on Innovation in Higher Education. Although our two panelists are already known to perhaps all of you, I still need to say a few words of introduction here. The first panelist is Dr. Morris Chen, or Dr. Morris Zhang, the chairman of Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, who also received his PhD degree from Stanford University. For many years, Dr. Zhang has been a top leader in Taiwan's high-tech industry, actually a world-known leader in semiconductor industry. He has also been an eminent voice on many issues important to the economic and the general well-being of Taiwan. We are very thankful that he is willing to come to contribute to this event. Some of you may even know that he holds, should I say, sharp views on educational affairs. The other panelist is Dean Richard Saller, who just gave a wonderful speech about the ways Stanford tries to stimulate the ability and the resources actually to innovate among its students. Innovation and creativity are really an important issue in our age of knowledge economy. It is my considered view that they will also be helpful for the purpose of leading a fruitful and good life, as Dean Saller just showed in his last point. Both Chairman Zhang and Dean Saller are experienced and respected leaders in their own fields. We truly appreciate this opportunity to hear from them. Now let me ask first Chairman Zhang to give his remarks.
Thank you. Let me first say that I'm very comfortable with Dr. Saller's thesis that a general education, which is called a liberal education somewhere else, liberal arts education, a general or liberal arts or liberal education is good for fostering creativity, for developing innovative people. And I need to add, a liberal education, a general education, is also better than a specialized education in creating future leaders. In fact, that was my thesis in several of my talks in the last many years. I gave the talk normally to the elite universities in Taiwan. Of course, National Taiwan University is at the top of that heap. And my thesis has always been that you need to have undergraduate liberal arts education, because that is, I think, good for developing future leaders. So a general education is not just good in developing innovative people, entrepreneurs. It is also good in developing future leaders in every field, in government, in business, in every field. Now, having said that, I would point out to you a few problems, both for the student and for society. All right? Problems for student. If you listen to me and you you go to a school that has general education in undergraduate. In other words, you are not as specialized as other students, as some other students in other schools. MIT, for instance. You go to Stanford, undergraduate, and you pursue the kind of dreamy curriculum that Dr. Saller described. And your peer went to MIT. And for 4 years, he took specialized courses, as I did, I was mechanical engineer at MIT, undergraduate. I had 2 years of internal combustion engine. I had 1 year of fluid mechanics and another year of advanced fluid mechanics. I had 1 year of heat transfer. I had a whole year of vibrations, watching the professor demonstrating vibrations by vibrating himself. I had all those. That was quite specialized training at MIT. And then, all right, you go to Stanford, you pursue this thing. I go to MIT, I pursue the specialized. Then, 4 years later, graduation, and we both looking for a job. I think I have a better chance of getting a better job than you do. For now, maybe in 10, 20 years, you will be better off. And actually, the statistic is that in 10 or 20 years, the person with the general education is better off. But for the time being, for the next 5, 10 years, I think I'm better off. And whether you will be better off in 10, 20 years is actually still a question, So that's the question for students, for the graduates. Now, it's a problem for the country also, I think everyone wants to be a school like Dr. Saller describes. Everyone wants to be at Stanford. But the fact is that the country needs people of all kinds. Yes, the country needs innovators, leaders, entrepreneurs. But really, not too many of them, not that many of them. The country needs a lot more technicians, a lot more specialists than generalists. So if you try to get every school to be like this, every university to be like this, I think the country is in deep, deep trouble. So anyway, I am in complete agreement with your thinking. I myself feel that I benefited. I pursued I was Harvard for 1 year, freshman. And then I went on to MIT for the rest of my undergraduate education and also master's degree at MIT. And then after working for a few years, I went to Stanford and it was PhD, very specialized. Let me assure you, not only was there not humanities, very special at Stanford. However, I pursued a general education myself. My interest in humanities was very much stimulated just during the year I had at Harvard. And then I pursued, I did the interpretive and aesthetic inquiry. I did the ethical reasoning. So anyway, and business. My My father had given me a few shares of IBM stock when I was an undergraduate student, and I began to develop a very keen interest, way out of proportion with my holding, the interest. But I developed a keen interest in the stock market. And I was only 21 years old. And I started to read magazines in the library, business magazines, Wall Street Journal, etc. And now, even before that, I started to read papers, newspaper, New York Times religiously. So, I mean, all those things. And I started to listen to classical music very seriously. And they not only helped me in my management career, which came much later. All these general education subjects, I became interested in history. So I knew a little bit about Rome also. Not only did they help me, the general education, not only did they help me in my business career, it more than anything else enhanced my quality of life. Because you're not a Shakespearean scholar, but I will tell you that one of my bedside books is Shakespeare. I go back, occasionally I will go back. Actually, there are two books on my bedside. Shakespeare's tragedies and the Chinese Red Chamber Dream. And I spend 15, 20 minutes often before I fall asleep. I must have gone back to them, over my life 1,000 times. But there are problems, as I said.
Okay, thank you, Chairman Zhang. Thank you for your interesting and wide-ranging points and the stories about yourself. Okay, now this is
took only 10 minutes,
Chairman Zhang has his autobiography, published in Chinese only.
I see.
So okay. Anyway, now
it was a bestseller.
Okay, so now let's turn to Dean Saller. And in addition to your speech about the Stanford curricular initiatives, and do you have anything general to say, or anything that can serve as response to the points Chairman Zhang just made?
Let me just say I'm in complete agreement with you about not having everyone be a leader. I think you're exactly right that we need to think about the different needs. What I would say, though, is that the society as a whole has an interest not only in educating people who can work in the economy, but also good citizens. And I think that that's a value that gets expressed in the conversation about higher education in the United States, but is not realized as often as it should be. I have a good friend at Harvard University, Howard Gardner, in the education school there, who's in the process of doing a very interesting study about higher education. And what he's found is that in his survey of American university presidents, every one of them says that a goal in the education of their students is to educate good citizens. He then surveyed parents and asked them why they were supporting their children in higher education, and not one of them said it was to educate better citizens. And so I think that there's this kind of conflict, and the issue that it raises. I do believe that a knowledge of history is a real value in citizenship. But I think it's not always easy to get students to take that seriously. I think their parents often don't take it seriously. They think of the value of the education as a benefit to the student and his or her family. So one of the challenges that I feel is to try to persuade the students to take these courses seriously. I did want to make one other point, and that is I'm a personal believer in the value of being educated in different approaches, because I started my career taking engineering courses. I was an engineering major at the University of Illinois for the first year. I did all of my science and math requirements, and then I took a course in Roman history and thought that that was really fascinating, and I flipped into Roman history at the end of my first year and began Latin, Greek, German, and history courses. But I do think that what I'm doing today as dean is very much facilitated by the courses that I took in engineering, because, not to be immodest, but I'm a humanist who understands numbers and budgets, and in another life I would like to have been management science and engineering major, I think.
I believe it. And I wish there were more lawyers that were trained in engineering and numbers too. Yeah.
Okay, with regard to the main thing of today's event, Chairman Zhang and Dean Saller are in almost complete agreement. We still have some time left for your dialogue. Can we talk more about the other side of the coin? Talking about the advantage of technical specialized education. After all, that is sort of a common wisdom that to having a specialized education will do you much good when you are entering the career. As for 20 years from now, we are all dead in the long run. So
you said 20 years?
I mean, 20 years from now, I mean, after you enter into your career. So I mean, we don't need to worry about that. So still, I mean, having a sort of, particularly in the days of knowledge economy, and we have accumulated so much knowledge, it really takes a lot of time and effort to really get into one field. So having a specialized education, I mean, still consider an important advantage to most of people. Also, another question is, a point is made by Chairman Zhang, that is, well, there are only so many, a society only needs so many people taking on, say, innovative jobs. Not many people can be innovative, but innovation is such a big part of the economy now and in the future. And if you are not in the innovative sector of the economy, you can get poor very easily. And so there's a sort of a widening disparity of the income.
Innovation has become a very big part of the economy, but the percentage of innovators in the whole population is still very small. That is one of the reasons why the disparity between the rich and poor is enlarging. Yeah. And that is not going to change very much, I'm afraid, by having liberal education in a few universities, you know. It's not, because it goes back to high school, primary school. It goes back to the whole environment. It may even go back to genetics, but I'm not going to talk about it, okay? So when you oh yes, I think there are definite advantages. You first asked, let's talk about the other side, you said. Let's talk about the advantages of specialized training. I think there are definite advantages. I mean, look, I went to specialized training, as I said, you know, and you could still pursue general education yourself. maybe not quite as efficiently as Stanford would teach you, but you can still do it yourself. And also, the specialized training, if you want to win a Nobel Prize, I think you ought to start specialized training when you're 5 years old. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and if you want to be a top engineer, you also, I think, are better off going to a specialized training. We were talking about innovators, entrepreneurs, and leaders. And actually, those people are relatively few in the whole society. So for most people in the society, I think specialized training is better.
Okay, so what does Dean Saller have to say about these issues?
He does not agree now.
I completely agree with Chairman Chang about the first job out of college. There's no question but that a specialized training in engineering it makes that easier. What, though, I think is worth remembering, and this was in some of the research that I quoted, is that the technology is changing so fast that these days one is very unlikely to go a full career, and after all we're talking about 40 years at least, maybe 50 years now in the United States, to go 50 years using the same set of specialized skills because the technology is just changing too fast. So one of the keys is thinking about how we educate students in a way that lets them adapt to changes in the needs. And I think part of our goal is to get them to have the frame of mind that you had in terms of continued reading and appreciation in literature, in music, in art. And I don't know that we have a particularly good formula for that, but I do believe that that's important, in part because I think great works of literature resonate with people at different ages. I remember that my first teaching job was at Swarthmore College, and I taught a course there with a colleague who did Greek literature, and it was a terrific course in Greek history and literature. And one of the works that we had the students read was Euripides' Trojan Women, which is a play about the aftermath of the Greek sack of the city of Troy, in which the most poignant scene is when a Greek soldier throws the young baby Astyanax off the walls and kills Astyanax, Hector's son, as a way of completely destroying the Trojan lineage. And I remember so vividly, we had a woman in the class who asked to audit, and she was probably 60 years old. We read this play, and she had a tear coming down her cheek when she read the scene of Astyanax being thrown off the ramparts. The 18-year-old students, what was that to them? I mean, it had no meaning at all. So I do think we're trying to develop an appreciation that can continue through a lifetime and not simply be a course that an 18 or a 19-year-old student takes.
Okay, does Chairman Zhang have anything more to say about?
No, not at this point.
Okay, but still, we are still facing a problem of sort of conflict between two models of higher education. One, so almost completely focused on specialized technical education, and liberal arts education only serving as sort of a...
No. I beg to disagree at this point.
Okay.
No conflict at all. They're all complementary.
Okay.
We have the top tier, general education for the future leaders and so on. And then we have what I would describe as a vast middle class that teaches specialized professions, engineering, science, in fact, various humanities things, you know, but specialized humanities things, yeah, business and so on, vast middle class. And then we even have a lower level of trade schools. They're all complementary.
Okay, so what does Dean Saller have to say? Are there conflicts?
Once again, I agree completely. No, I think one of the strengths of the American higher education system is that it does have very many varied schools, and so I was talking this morning about Stanford, which is a very rarefied atmosphere, and President Obama is focusing on community colleges with the kind of training that you're talking about, and I think that he's right that investment of public funds at that level will probably have a better payoff than other kinds of investments, because that's so important in an area where, because American K-12 education is so weak in many places, we need stronger community colleges to help with education of people who are doing the kind of trade work that you described. So I think complementarity is exactly right. I guess I would say again that across these different sectors, there needs to be at least a little bit of an attempt for education for purposes of citizenship, because we want all of these people to be able to be involved in the political processes that guide our different countries.
That's true, but it should really have happened at the secondary school level already.
I agree, well, and even in the home. And yeah, I agree. This is partly a counsel of despair because the high schools in the United States are so uneven.
Yeah.
Okay, we have had an interesting and wide-ranging discussion, and some people in the audience may be eager to join. And so I think maybe now it's almost 11:30, so maybe I think we can now open up the floor for discussion. So we are now taking questions from the audience. And before you ask your questions or giving comments, please just say a word about who you are. Yes, please.
I wanted to just simply ask, and actually it was part of Morris's issue, that we need all liberal education, that we understand. We need to be creative. But we're losing the basic skills. You got to still have the basic skills to produce or to do things. Taiwan needed to do things to sell or to produce that you needed to make a living out of it. We become too creative, innovative, everybody just talks, go on strikes, and there's nothing produced. So the word creative, innovative is important. But to fit the Taiwan model, some adjustments have to come to Morris's point. The simple question is, giving you all this, we all in agreement, what can you tell us? What wisdom can you give us to Taiwan and to the industry? We are not going, as I was saying, we don't know where we're going, basically. Give us some wisdom, tell us how to go.
So this is a question of the responsibility of training skills, business or schools?
Oh, I think both, in part because, as I said, I think workers today entering the labor force need to think that they will have 3, 4, 5, 6 different jobs over the course of their career, and so retraining has to be a part of it, and that's going to happen with business in all likelihood. A couple of thoughts occur to me as I listen to you. One is, I do think that the linkage to the economy is important, and I suggested this just briefly. what really brought this home to me was that in 2010, I was invited, along with Gerhard Casper, the former president at Stanford, to go to Libya and to advise Muammar Gaddafi and his son, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, on how to reform their universities. And I discovered that Libya at that point was spending 4% of GDP on universities, which is higher than any developed country by a lot. In Northern Europe, the average is 1.1%, 1.2% of GDP. The United States, it's about 2.7%. Libya was spending 4% of GDP, and they were getting practically nothing out of it. And the reason was because their university education was not linked to economic needs that the students could flow into. So how do you manage that? Well, again, I think that the autonomy of universities may have virtues in allowing for local adjustments to develop students who will then be able to flow into the economy. And that's something that Stanford does a lot, and I wouldn't presume to give wisdom here because I know that you're not foolish enough to take the advice of somebody who knows so little, has been in Taiwan now a total of 4 days. But Stanford, we're now, I didn't talk very much about this, but we're now doing more and more with internships and other kinds of opportunities for students to get to know the business world so that they can think about how to prepare for it. And because Stanford students have so much latitude in choice of courses, I think that this opens opportunities for them. Now, again, this is, as Chairman Chung said, this is at Stanford level. This is not at the level of vocational training for entry into jobs. At community college level, one of the developments in the United States that I think is promising is that more and more the businesses are teaming up with local community colleges to design programs that will provide the education that the students need on graduation. So there's an effort there, but we're very, very far from having a perfect system.
Yes. Chairman Zhang's response to
I think actually Douglas's question, I actually think we have already covered when I said that what Dr. Saller has talked about today is the top tier. It's leaders, entrepreneurs, innovators. There is I describe it as vast middle class that will teach specialized things. Now, I gather from Douglas's tone of voice that he really wanted an even lower level technicians and so on. And I think that's it. And I covered that also. I said that the top tier that Dr. Saller talked about today, the vast middle class, that's like a lot of ordinary colleges. And they do teach specialized things. And then at lower level, we have trade schools and so on.
Hi, question for Saller. You mentioned earlier that you're seeing a more diverse group of incoming freshmen than before. I'm wondering, as you look at the students now versus 10, 20 years ago, is there a type of primary education that you think prepares students better for what they might get at Stanford?
Well, so I think that the high-end high school education is really quite good, and they have modified their approach to education away from just textbook memorization toward more critical thinking, and so I think that that's made improvements. The problem is that much of American high school education doesn't have that kind of advantage, and in too many cases we have uninspired teachers reading out of textbooks in some of the underprivileged neighborhoods. So in one way, I think the education has improved. Students are coming to Stanford now with many AP credits, and they have done a lot of advanced work before they get to Stanford. And what I see then is that at time of graduation from Stanford, some of these students who are really serious and have begun their work toward a Nobel Prize are publishing in top-tier international journals as seniors. Along with that, though, I think as the admissions has become more and more competitive. This year at Stanford, we had 42,000 applications for about 2,000 admits for 1,800 places in the end. Students in high school, I think, are being programmed more and more with a view specifically to admission to elite universities. And that does worry me some. I would like to see more kind of open-ended flexibility because only a few of our students will win Nobel Prizes in the end. They have to go off and do many other things. So in terms of reform of high school, I think the challenge for the United States is to bring the lowest level schools up to the standard of the highest level schools. And recent research at Stanford in the School of Education suggests that part of that problem really has to do with inequality of income among families in the United States. And until we're able to reduce that gap, it's going to be very hard to reduce the inequality of education. And yet that's a real drag on individuals and on the economy.
Okay.
Right.
So I think there's kind of a conflict between that and what you're saying across
Well, yes, but I guess what you could say is that if you get your calculus down ahead of time, then you can go on and do other things at Stanford. The students who I think are challenged at Stanford are students who come in without, strong mathematics, particularly mathematics. That's the single biggest hurdle to get over if you haven't come from a strong high school background. And that's absolutely necessary in a variety of fields.
Okay. Does President Young have a question to ask?
Thanks for the very inspiring talk. My question is, what is the mechanism? How Stanford initiate this program to promote or to make the student more creative? What is the mechanism? How to initiate this program? Is it a top-down process? Is the dean's will or the provost's will? or it is a bottoms-up, the need coming from the student or from the professor?
I wish you hadn't asked that question because I have to admit that Alice, in her introduction, gave me way too much credit. Deans emphatically do not have authority over the curriculum. The authority over the curriculum by statute at Stanford, and I think this is true of other elite private universities, rests with the faculty and the departments. And so this Seuss report that I quoted from, which suggested reforms, was done by a task force of faculty, a couple of dozen faculty. They were appointed by the provost, and they brought their recommendations to the provost, but ultimately they had to be voted on by the faculty senate. The students were included in the conversations, but they themselves didn't have a vote in the end. And then it's left to the deans to figure out how to carry it out. And so we do have some role in it, but not in the formulation of the requirements. In fact, I will tell you that the final faculty vote in the Faculty Senate was formally on the recommendation of a faculty committee as a part of the Senate. And when the faculty committee came to the final formulation of the proposal, they kicked me out of the room. They told me to leave. And so I had no voice in the final formulation.
Okay, there are many people raising their hand. Someone in the very back, I mean, you raise your hand the first. Yes, yes, please.
Hello, Dr. Saller, and I'm a student, third-grade student from NTU, and I'm majoring in electrical engineering and double majoring in philosophy. And I kind of feel there's a giant gap of resources between these two departments. So I'm kind of wondering, how could you persuade alumni of society to recognize the value of humanities researching and teaching for you?
I think that's difficult. One of the things that Stanford does that I think helps encourage investment are these programs that I mentioned that bring together the sciences, engineering, and the humanities. So Symbolic Systems has been an enormously successful program at Stanford, incorporating computer science as well as philosophy, psychology, and linguistics. And that program has graduated some of the most successful leaders in Silicon Valley. Reid Hoffman, who developed LinkedIn, Marissa Mayer, who's now the CEO of Yahoo. So one thing that we try to do is look for places where the humanities can ride along with the engineering and science programs. The other thing I would say is that, frankly, Stanford alumni have been enormously supportive of the arts and humanities, and so they have provided resources. And one of the advantages of a private university in the United States that has strong alumni support is that we're able to support programs quite apart from whatever the government research emphasis is. I would say that as a result of our last campaign at Stanford, the arts were the biggest beneficiaries of the program. So we have a new concert hall where students can perform in a state-of-the-arts acoustic facility. We are just about to open a new art and art history building where students will be able to do studio arts and take courses in art history. We haven't yet built a new building for philosophy, but that's because they need to be able to talk. And they can talk pretty effectively. But actually, the humanities faculty at Stanford has grown more than the others over the last decade. So at Stanford, we have had that kind of support. And my challenge now as dean is to make sure that I have enough student interest to warrant the size of the faculty in the humanities that we have.
Okay, so many, yes, please, this one.
Good afternoon for Dr. John and Dr. Richard Saller. And I have two questions for Dr. Richard Saller. So the first question will be, what is your opinion about the startup, especially for the technology orientation? A reason that why I want to ask is about, because you can see that recently people like us, like the graduate students, engage more and more in the startup business. But when you mention about the startup in Taiwan, our first image will be new apps or a website. So it's kind of like the diversity. So that is the reason that I want to ask. Is about any opinion or the case that you can share with us about the startup for the technology orientation. And the second question will be, is there any advice or something that we should be take care of according to your experience or your case? Thank you.
I'm glad that you asked that question. One of the reasons that I think it's useful to provide students, all of our students, with an education in humanities and in social sciences is to develop a sense of values. And I think sometimes Stanford students get caught up in this frenzy for startups that at times turns out to be profitable, but doesn't turn out to have a long-term good benefit for society. I think about one of the students at Stanford who, as a sophomore, developed an app. And what this app did was it showed on an iPhone a glass being filled with beer. And he was a millionaire by the time he graduated, selling that app for, I think, $1 a piece. And, you know, I wish him well, but in terms of the long-term benefit for society, you know, I think that it's limited. One of the Stanford magazine covers a few years ago had the mantra, innovate incessantly. And I guess I would prefer to have the mantra, innovate thoughtfully, to try to create long-term value that benefits the broader society. So I guess that is my answer to both of your questions.
Okay, someone close here. Okay, yes.
Hello, my name is Eric Chen. I'm from Kaohsiung Medical University, also a Stanford alum. Basically, I maybe framing some of or organizing some of the thoughts that I had. I think that today's discussion occurred on a couple of different levels, that there is a national policy level that we kind of touched on, an institutional level or perspective that Dean Saller spoke about, and an individual level. And I think there are different tensions among these different levels. And so my feeling is that I really think that humanities should be broadened across all spectrum, deepened, and basically maybe it's a reframing or opening another dialogue and discussion about what are the fundamentals or basic, whereas when we were growing up it was reading, writing, and arithmetic. And Dean Saller mentioned that mathematics is really important, but for reading and writing, maybe that's humanities, and what should be the balance, and maybe it is a continuous discussion, and what should be pushed into the elementary school level, secondary school level, just like Dean Saller mentioned that that in terms of what set of values are we going to inculcate in people, perhaps there's no set values, but we need to educate them or imbue in them that sense that they have to find their own values. They have to find what is the right balance, what kind of humanities, besides reading and writing, that we need at each different level. And my apologies for going all across the board, but I think this is a great talk because I think not only for me, for others here, I think that it inspired a lot of questions. How do you say, forced us to think more deeply about the various issues, and I really appreciate this, and I think I came away with a lot.
Could Chairman Zhang respond first to
talking about question.
Well, basically, the comments about the education of the humanities going down deeper and to the secondary education and so on.
But actually, the deeper down, the earlier the education is, the more humanities you have, don't you? That was my experience.
Language skills, maybe. Language skills nowadays.
Language skills. And stuff like history, you know, and geography. I don't know. I think you should count it as humanities too, don't you?
We would call it a social science, I think. But
well, actually, I'm remembering back on my primary school curriculum. It's Chinese, English, arithmetic. Surely you don't think we should exclude arithmetic, you know? I mean, even though it's not humanities. And then history, geography.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
So how about Dean Saller?
Well, I think it is useful. The only thing I would add to what Eric said, though, is that and this repeats just briefly what I said earlier, I think students are able to appreciate different subjects at different points in their development. And so in the United States right now, classical history is taught in 6th grade. to 12-year-olds. That limits the sophistication of the historical account, and it's often more myth and legend, good stories, than it is what I would call history. So I think we need to offer opportunities throughout the course of education.
Okay, maybe we can have one last question. Okay, someone over there. Yes, you.
Hello. Hello, Professor Saller. I have two questions to you. And the first is, can you talk more specific on how do diversity begets innovative? And the second question is that I just wonder, what is the most important perspective when you're choosing the students under diversity? Because diversity has many perspectives, such as cultural diversity, or such like their race or something like that. And what is the most important perspective when you choosing a student?
Very good questions. So in terms of diversity begetting creativity, let me offer you an example. When I was provost at the University of Chicago, we had a terrifically successful National Academy level researcher who worked on the connection between race and breast cancer. It was no accident that she was a woman and an African-American woman. And so your own background doesn't determine the truth of the results of your research, but it often shapes the direction of your research. And to have many people involved who come with different ways of thinking helps. Give you just another brief example. I had a seminar, I taught a seminar a few years ago in which I was teaching about Roman slavery. And I made the point that in different societies, there are different sort of dividing line between those who are important, significant, and those who are disposable. And so in Roman society, slaves were disposable. Citizens were protected. Today in the United States, and more or less around the world, maybe not everywhere, but most places, there's a view that all human beings are worth protecting. And now there are movements in the United States toward animal rights, that animals are worth protecting. And I made a comment that, one of the students in the seminar made a comment, we in the West believe da-da-da-da-da-da. And we happened to have a student from Argentina in the seminar, and he said, what do you mean by we in the West? And that was a perfect challenge to that student to break down his assumptions. So that's why I think it's valuable. In terms of admission of students, happily, that's not my job, because it would be one of the hardest jobs at Stanford. But I think we're looking for all kinds of diversity: socioeconomic diversity, ethnic diversity, gender diversity, and really the more experiences and different points of view that we can bring into the university, that will make the university a more creative place, I think. And I talked to alumni from Stanford who remember that maybe the most important part of their educational experience at Stanford was having a roommate who was a Native American from a reservation and brought a whole different perspective to the living experience of the student.
I completely agree with that.
Thank you.
Diversity enhances creativity. Diversity is good.
Okay, many people have questions, but our time is limited, so I now have to try to conclude our session. But I still want to ask our two panelists for final words.
I have a very simple question for Dr. Saller, really.
Okay,
I remember when I first arrived in the U.S. in 1949, University of Chicago had a great books program.
Yes.
Robert Hutchins, in fact.
Yes.
Now, but I understand that later it died.
So it declined. University of Chicago still has a much more structured core general education curriculum than Stanford does, but it does not have great books or a Western Civ course that's required of all students. That's true. And I think that's part of a trend that virtually every university in the United States has gone through.
Well, none of them had a great books program. What do you mean? Virtually every university going through
well, Columbia has their Common Core, which involves reading some of the great books that were in Hutchins' curriculum. But what I mean is the notion of a structured general education that requires certain specific courses of all students, that has generally declined in the United States.
I see. Yeah, that's good. That's good. That's the logical way to go. You know.
So thank you. We have the final question and the final words from our two panelists. So I think we have had a lively and fruitful discussion. I really want to thank Chairman Zhang and Dean Saller for their willingness to take part in this event and for their thoughts and insights. So this is the end of this session. So I will give this event back to our host. Thank you.